This is the Aptitude Outdoors Podcast, where we interview travelers, explorers, and outdoorsmen and women to bring you the best tips and stories from around the world. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Aptitude Outdoors Podcast. Thanks for tuning back in. I'm doing something a little different today. I'm just kind of flying off the cuff. I just got back from the Hunt Fish Podcast Summit down in Texas, and I had a really good time. I talked to some really amazing people. Over the next coming weeks, you'll be seeing them. Probably some of the greatest conversations that I've had to date, and that's not an exaggeration. I know it's my job to hype things up, but I mean, these are really impactful conversations from some of the leaders in the industry. And, you know, we made it a new page for Hunt Fish Podcast Summit on Instagram. We're building a YouTube channel right now. And I would really, before we dive into what I'm going to talk about here in a minute, I really would like for you guys to go and subscribe to those pages. It's a conference that I've been part of since the beginning, and I plan to be a part of for the years to come. And, I wouldn't be doing my part as a member of this summit without asking you to go check that out. Tons of great people there. You will not lose anything by following this page, I promise. Tons and tons of awesome content they'll be putting out just about conservation in the outdoors. And that brings me to my next point. So any of you who have been listening since the start of the Aptitude Outdoors podcast have kind of watched it grow. I've covered a wide array of topics, everything from backpacking to hiking to hunting to fishing to kayaking to you name it. I mean, we've talked fitness, we've talked everything under the sun in the outdoors, and that is because I am very interested in all those things. I mean, I'm an outdoor recreationist. I'm an outdoor, enthusiast. I'm a hunter. I love conservation, and that brings me to this point. I think it's time for me on a personal level, since I run this show solely by myself. I film it all, I edit it all, I do all the research, I talk to the guest, which is very common for a podcast, nothing of any surprise there. And I think it's time for me to kind of focus down onto what's important to me. And over these 2 years that I've been doing this, give or take, I've talked to people that I never thought that I would have the chance to converse with in my life. I mean, I've talked to rock stars. You'll be seeing coming up. I've talked to executive director of the Wild Sheep Foundation. I mean, there's just so many big names. I've met awesome people in the industry. Too many to name. Some of them being Derek York of Impact Outdoors, Chester Moore, editor-in-chief of Texas Fish and Game. These people have all been, mentors to me over these last few years. And you've all heard my journey of hunting and fishing, and with that came a 5-year journey of self-discovery, I guess you would say. I don't know if that's the right terms, but to me, I don't want to say I'm tired of talking about everything and everything under the sun, because all of the topics I've covered, I'm passionate about. I wouldn't be talking about them if I didn't care about them, but I think it's time for me to stick to a message that is more direct and more pointed, and I don't want this to be disheartening for people who've enjoyed the podcast the way it is, but with growth comes new challenges. As the podcast has been growing, I feel like I've just been floundering just topic to topic, no direction. And I want to change that. I feel like I never thought I'd have a voice in the outdoors industry. It's like when a hobby turns into something more, I guess is what I'm saying. And it has become something more. My interests have always been outdoors and making videos about the outdoors. Those are the two things that I enjoy most in life. And I think it's time to go down those roads independently. So firstly, if anybody does watch this on the YouTube channel, I know it's not the majority of you. My YouTube channel is now just going to be strictly the Aptitude Outdoors Podcast. The Aptitude Outdoors YouTube channel is now Aptitude Outdoors Podcast. So we'll strictly be posting the podcast episodes to that as video, as I always have. Nothing will change there. And then I'm branching out and I'm making a completely separate YouTube channel, which is just Aptitude Outdoors, which I know is confusing. It's confusing to me, but I can't think of a better way to do it. And I don't have a marketing degree. I don't have a marketing team. I just don't know any other way to do this logically that makes sense to me. So I wanted to let the viewers and listeners know that I'm splitting the two. And there's many reasons for that. The podcasts don't perform incredibly well on YouTube. That's okay. I enjoy making them. The video part of the podcast is something I like doing. It allows me to have fun. It allows me to be more personalized with the guests. I don't like just having phone calls with people. It doesn't feel personal to me. I like to see them. I like to get their reactions. I like to joke around. Like that's me as a person. So the video podcast is not going away. I've also really, really decided that I want to teach people more about conservation and why that's so important to me. I mean, there's a myriad of issues going on in the conservation world. And I mean, the cities are getting bigger. The world is growing smaller every single day. And that's wildlife is having trouble. And as someone who, even with a small voice like mine in the outdoors, I feel it's like my personal obligation to do everything I can in my power to make sure that I can shift the needle, even if it's 1 centimeter. That I feel like that's what I've been put on this earth to do. And I've been thinking about this for literal years. Like I know I needed to dive down and really narrow down my podcast, but just like you listening to this podcast, I have a full-time job that is not the podcast. I don't make any money with this podcast, and all I have is a voice. So I want to use that voice for good. Now, what does that mean? That does not mean that I'm only going to talk to hunters, okay? This is not going to be a hunting podcast. I still will be backpacking. I still will be fishing. I still will be kayaking. All of those things are very passionate to me. But unless my guests have a conservation ethic, I just cannot see a reason to continually just keep talking about the same things over and over again. I love hearing people's stories and adventures. That's not going to change. That will always be part of the podcast. But my guests need to be a little more focused, and people that want to come on the show, I don't want you to feel alienated, and listeners, I don't want you to feel alienated. But from day one, I've always talked about why these things are important. And you know, the format's going to be exactly the same. Nothing's going to change. It's just the focus of the guest is going to be a little bit different, focused around conservation, preservation, preserving wildlands, conserving animals, and those words need definition. I'm going to be talking to more experts in the field on what that means. There's so many terms that get thrown around that I don't have a full grasp on, so the podcast is going to go that route. So I want you guys to not be caught off guard. I want you to be aware, and I don't want to mince words. If that's not what you're into, the podcast is going to change. And it's hard for me to do that because I've worked so hard. I've put in thousands of hours on this podcast because I love it. And as I just recently said, I feel like I have one opportunity to get this message out to the world as just one small individual on planet Earth from the middle of Ohio, United States. But I've been granted, of no will of my own, amazing opportunities to learn a lot about conservation, and I've made great contacts in the industry. And this is me being honest and real with you. If that's not what you like, I don't want you to feel obligated or whatever. Nobody's obligated to listen to my podcast. I say that all the time. But this is my statement. Like, I have to do this. That's what my heart is saying. And, you know, I feel bad for anyone that listens to this podcast because that the breadth of the podcast has always been like fun, lighthearted, all topics outdoors. And as much as I love that, I just need to change. For me, if anyone, because I'm the one that has to live and sit with this content every single day of my life. And it's been my goal to, I don't want to say selflessly, it's been my goal to get these ethics out there and define things that people are confused about. I'm confused about a lot of conservation. And this last 2 years going to the Hunt Fish Podcast Summit has opened my eyes to that. And I feel like I have the best conversations in that arena, the conservation arena, because the people I talk to are so passionate. and the conversations tend to get a little heavier. We're talking about hard things, literal mass extinctions of animals, and I want to do what I can to help. That's it. That's the end of the line for me. And I just want to take a minute to appreciate all of the people who have been here through this whole journey. I mean, I've seen the podcast grow to numbers that I never thought feasible, and they're not even close to the massive podcasters in the world. I mean, I'm a small fish in a big pond, and I still have a following though, and I appreciate everything that you guys have given me. I've met so many people through podcasting, and I don't want to alienate you. So the podcast isn't changing in any way, shape, or form other than I will strictly be pushing conservation messages from here on out. I don't know what that means. I'm still formulating this idea in my head. It's just, I'm tired of floundering. I feel like I'm not gaining much traction. I know this is a long game. I know I have to stick around for a while if I want to make it. I've read the books. I've read the literature on how to become a successful podcaster. You guys know I love reading. That's all I do. I've watched the YouTube videos. And the reason that I'm doing this is, again, I want to help. That's it. Fair enough. And, the YouTube channel, the Aptitude Outdoors Podcast YouTube channel, as I said, is going to remain just the podcast. No other content will be going on there. Now, the other YouTube channel, which is just strictly outdoors, I am going to be doing something very different from what I've done in the past. I know I've made shorter documentaries, but I'm going to make a huge focus and part of my life into making impactful videos that teach more about conservation. I have ideas floating around. They're going to come to fruition. It may be sloppy at first because I'm not a filmmaker. I just am really passionate about it, and I'm halfway decent with asking interview questions, and I feel like that's the path where it led me because, as you know, if you've listened to this podcast long enough, I have an anthropology degree. I was trained very heavily in how to ask questions to people. And I feel like it would be a waste of my, skill that I've learned over almost a decade at this point, how to interview. And I want to use that one very minuscule skill that I have. I don't have a lot of skills, but that's one of the skills I feel fairly confident in, is interviewing people for good change in the world. And the thing that I'm most passionate about is saving our wild places. And that YouTube channel, Aptitude Outdoors, will be strictly with content like that. A few things I want to clarify are the terms. First off, what conservation means, and the difference between conservation, preservation. Very confusing terms if you're not aware of what they mean. And I'm learning this as I go as well. I mean, I heard so many terms this weekend, Pittman-Robertson Act. I don't have the answers to these things. I don't know what they mean fully in detail. So I'm going to try and talk to experts that do know what these things mean. And I just want to clarify everything. So I want to make videos on that. I want to make videos on wildlife, and I want to make videos on conservation. So that channel is going to be strictly dedicated to that. No podcasts will be on Aptitude Outdoors YouTube channel. So things are changing. I don't know what that means, but I do want to make this my career. I do want that more than anything in my life. I know that's on me. That takes a lot of hard work. You guys don't owe me anything. I understand that. And, I just appreciate everybody who's hung around for this long. Like I said, I'm just incredibly grateful that there are people out there who decided to listen to me. I've never felt like I've had much to say. That's why I don't I've never done a solo podcast until literally right now. And a few weeks ago, I put out a solo podcast, and it's just, growth is painful. Change is painful. I've had anxiety about this for months and months, thinking, how am I going to pull this off? And I sat down in Texas with some of the leading industry names in the outdoors. And, I've watched people like the Gale Force twins, who are huge YouTube and social media celebrity success stories. I've talked to them on the podcast, which you'll hear soon. And I've learned so much from them. Even in the brief time we had together, I've learned from people that really understand how to make an impact, and I think that's what I need to do. I could be completely wrong. This could be a terrible move on my part, but in my heart, it does not feel wrong. It feels like the right thing to do, and that's all I have to work off of. So Again, I'm going to stop rambling here. I could just do this for 3 hours straight because I've been trained to talk for my whole life. That's what I do for a living. So I really appreciate all of you guys. I know I say that a lot. It's not just a buzzword. Like, I still can't comprehend at this point in the game that people are listening to this podcast. I started it for fun, screwing around with my friends, and I'm so grateful to be here and so honored that people would take this even remotely seriously. And, thank you all for listening. I'm not going to ask you to do anything. Just thanks for everything, and I appreciate you guys. And I'll be back soon with some really heavy-hitting episodes that I feel are some of the best episodes I've ever recorded in my life. So thank you, all Aptitude Outdoors listeners. You guys are the greatest.